The Fancounters Celebrity Podcast, number 166. Coming to you from nowhere near the entertainment capital of the world, this is the Fancounters Celebrity Podcast.
You were like the carrot top of interviewers.
Wow, how disappointing was that question?
You did not just ask me that.
Well, that's a big question.
Never mind, I'm done. I'm not doing the show.
Wow, I can't believe it.
I'm telling you, I'm hooked.
Nick.
Yeah, he's so awesome. He's still a good friend of mine.
Welcome to the Fancounters Celebrity Podcast. My name's Nick.
And I'm Tracy.
And we are on social media. Just go to Instagram. We are at Fancounters Live. You can also join us on Facebook. Just search Fancounters. And if you want the private Facebook group to talk with us one-on-one, or one on all the fans that are there, that's at Sharpie Nation. Kind of like you're getting an autograph with a Sharpie marker. Search Sharpie Nation on Facebook. Well, Tracy, we are in a video format now.
I know, it's great. It's about time.
It's very weird. We had a lot of requests saying so many popular podcasts have video to their thing. And I was like, well, why would you want to sit around and watch people tape their show?
That must mean we're popular.
Well, we're getting there.
Yeah.
We're getting there. I mean, we've got 27,000 people on Facebook for a reason.
That's cool.
So anyway, we are going to try this video thing. And we've got a lot of avenues now that have hopefully opened up to us to expand the video reach of the podcast. So today is going to be our first time dealing with that. And we've already learned a few things about it.
Yes, we have.
Like we positioned the monitor where the guest is in the wrong spot.
Yeah. So instead of looking at the camera, we're looking like this.
We're like, hey. So that's going to be changed next time. That'll be a lot of fun. And then we're also sporting some Brewer hats today because we are getting ready for the start of the Major League Baseball season.
Now the big question is,
yeah,
will we be able to attend games in person this season?
I would think so, only because the NFL already has.
Yeah, but that's the NFL.
I know, and I don't give two hoots and a holler about that either. But they're having fans at their games. I would think that in some limited capacity, we could do the same.
I do have my voucher for, missing opening day last year. I got my voucher tickets for opening day this year. So,
and I hope you can use them. We've gone for the last 9 or so years.
Yeah, and except last year, obviously.
Yeah. Well, there's not much you can do about that. And anyway, so let's get to the show this week. I have somebody that my brother was very excited to have on the show, and his name is Steve Stoliar. And you're like, who the heck is that? Well, he is the personal assistant and the one who spent the last 3 years of Groucho Marx's life right alongside the man himself.
Always loved the Marx Brothers.
My brother's a big Marx Brothers fan, and I have probably only seen a few of their movies.
Really?
But I know a lot about Groucho because I would watch the reruns of You Bet Your Life.
Oh, yeah.
They put those out on DVD 10 years ago or so, and it's a game show where it's guessing with normal, everyday people, and Groucho is brilliant, and that's probably my first look into his life. And who Groucho was. And then I started watching movies like Duck Soup and Animal Crackers, and we found out the guy that we're talking to today is the reason I got to see that film.
Absolutely. And, I'm a little older than you, so I got to watch the Marx Brothers movies during, the Sundays when they did the family movies, like when Ma and Pa Kettle showed, and
I'm sorry, what?
Ma and Pa Kettle movies.
This audience has no idea.
I know, that's because I'm old.
You are old.
Yes, and then you got the Laurel and Hardy movies and the Marx Brothers movies. It was all like family theater type of stuff back then. So
Steve Stoliar is the writer for shows such as Murder, She Wrote, Simon and Simon, the new WKRP in Cincinnati, and he even wrote for Charlie Brown. We didn't talk a lot about that. We had mostly a conversation about Groucho Marx, and that is where we are going to start today. Here is Steve Stoliar on the Fancounters Celebrity Video Podcast.
All right.
Steve Stoliar, welcome to the Fancounters Celebrity Podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on. My pleasure.
Now, I've got kind of a rather long setup to a very basic question, so here we go.
Okay, well, I'll go cook something and feed my cat and then come back when you're done.
Oh, there
Perfect.
you go. That's
Perfect.
a good idea.
Some people, Steve, would say that you made your mark in the entertainment world with your book, Raised Eyebrows, a story about your years inside the house of the showbiz icon, Groucho Marx. It's a book that Woody Allen said was one of the best books he's ever read of a showbiz icon, and it was those experiences inside that house that turned you from a fan to a friend, which is an amazing thing that a lot of people like to do with celebrities if they could. So what was it about the Marx Brothers originally that made you become a super fan?
You'd think I would have a ready answer for this, and yet it's difficult to articulate why you're drawn to something and not something else, why you become a Beatles fan more than a Stones fan, or Laurel and Hardy over Abbott and Costello. All I can say is that the Marx Brothers, I think, seamless blend of clever dialogue and physical comedy, not necessarily slapstick, but like Harpo's pantomime and Groucho's dancing, that sort of thing. It was just such a winning combination. I was drawn to it naturally. My own sense of humor dovetailed nicely into that, which isn't to say that I don't love other comedians or comedy teams, but there was something about the Marx Brothers and Groucho in particular that really resonated with me. And when I discovered them and became really aware of them, I'm sure I must have caught pieces of movies when I was a little kid but didn't know what I was looking at. But when it really kicked in was probably around high school. And I wondered how they could have been kept from me so long because I thought they were wonderful.
Very cool.
Okay, well, take care now. I had a blast chatting with you guys.
All right, Steve, I got one for you. You were 19 when you spearheaded a campaign to get the film Animal Crackers, a movie that hadn't been available in a long time, to be officially re-released. How did you know how to do this at just 19 years of age?
I had no idea what I was doing. I continue along those lines.
I like the honesty.
You guys. Yeah, it's very gratifying now when I hear from a younger Marx Brothers fan who says, "Oh, Animal Crackers was the first movie of theirs I saw. I saw it on TV." And I think, you should only know the long and winding road, speaking of the Beatles, that it took to get that movie, something that you could just press play or call it up on streaming video or something. It was for many years the missing link in the Marx Brothers films. And, they only made about 12 or 13, so it isn't like they kept cranking out movie after movie. And it was their second film. It's the one in which Groucho plays Captain Spaulding, and his theme song, Hooray for Captain Spaulding, came from that. And jokes like, I shot an elephant in my pajamas. And it was a very famous film that none of my peers had seen because it hadn't been re-released to theaters in decades and hadn't been shown on TV as part of MCA's package of old Paramount films, which they owned. And I don't know if they still have that. I think they've probably replaced it with their usual Universal logo of the world turning. But for many years, they had these black and white syndicated packages of old Marx Brothers, W.C. Fields, Mae West movies from Paramount. And at the beginning, you'd see a big triangular shield, and it said, MCA TV release. And I wanted to take a Marx-a-lot and add an N because it bugged me to see MCA. And then the Paramount logo with the mountain would come up. But this wasn't part of them because Animal Crackers, basically because of an oversight, the copyright, Paramount's copyright lapsed, and the rights reverted back to the authors of the stage play and the composers of the songs for it. So George Kaufman, Maury Riskind, Harry Ruby, Burt Kalmar, they had the rights to it. And when Universal acquired all of the old Paramount films in the late 50s, all the pre-49 Paramount films, they owned Animal Crackers, but they didn't have the right to show it or include it in their syndication packages unless they wanted to spend the money clearing the rights with these writers and composers, and they saw no point in it. all my friends saw lots of point in it because it was the great, it was the golden chalice, the lost ark or whatever. It was like, wow, this is one of their most famous and it hasn't been seen. But they thought that that was just a waste of money to spend money on an old black and white movie when they could focus on important films like Airport 1975, So I hit upon the idea of starting up a petition drive when I was a history major at UCLA in the early 70s, and gather signatures to show Universal that it wasn't just my closest friends, but that there were many, many mostly young people, and I had friends at other colleges that were going to be collecting signatures where they were, and we were going to present that to Universal to say, see, all these people want to see it. You won't be wasting your money. And I managed to get in touch with Erin Fleming, a very controversial woman who had started out as Groucho's secretary and become his manager and really was in charge of his life in his last years. She decided what gigs he would take, what deals he would sign, what appearances he would make. She hired and fired staff and household people. And she brought Groucho to UCLA and alerted the media that we were going to be doing this Animal Crackers re-release campaign event. So I was so nervous. My heart was just pounding out of my chest. And it was one of the great thrills of my life because I was going to meet my hero, and in front of all of these cameras and a crush of blue-jeaned, tennis-shod teenagers leaning in to hear this wonderful old man and his mutterings. And I said, Groucho, I am very happy to be meeting you after all this time. And he said, well, you should be. And Erin Fleming said, this is Steve Stoliar. He's trying to get Animal Crackers re-released. And Groucho said, well, did you get it? And I said, no, not yet, but we're working on it. And he said, well, you better or I'll fire you. I didn't even realize I was working for you. How much are you paying me?
Right.
And he said, a little less than nothing. And we were off and running, and I couldn't believe that I was actually making sense sitting next to my hero talking about Animal Crackers, and Groucho talking about that he's flattered by the attention and thinks we're doing a fine job and all this stuff. And then the reporters, I remember one woman leaning forward with a microphone and saying, Mr. Marx, what is the purpose of your appearance here today? And he said, I expect to get lunch. And she said, but beyond that, I may get dinner. So that was great. And then, they were, what do you think of all the adulation of the younger generation? And he said, well, of course I'm flattered. Last Halloween, 3 kids came to my door dressed as Groucho, Harpo, and Chico. And someone said, what did you give them? And he said, I sent for the police. So even though he was old and frail and had suffered some strokes, it was clear that the mechanism that made him Groucho, that played with words and twisted questions and handed them back, was still there. And Universal relented. They caved in to the adverse publicity, spent the money to clear the rights to Animal Crackers, and decided to release it in 2 theaters, one in Westwood and one in New York, and that was going to be it. It's like they were going to humor Groucho, and this was in 74. They'll put it out there, let it do whatever little business it does, and then we don't want to hear about it again. Instead, it broke the house record at the UA Westwood that had been set by the French Connection several years earlier, and it was, as you can imagine, very gratifying for me to be sitting in a coffee shop in Westwood and look over and see all along the wall a line of young people waiting to spend their money to see this movie that basically on a whim, I thought, I want to see this out again. And I went to the premiere, I rented a tuxedo and my family. It was a wonderful, gratifying moment. And then that summer, 74, I had 2 summer jobs fall through for which I remain eternally grateful.
Yeah.
And my dad was his usual charming self saying, I don't want you sitting on your fanny all summer long. I want you to go get a job. Go to Taco Bell and see if they need someone there. Go to some of the coffee shops, see if they need someone to bus tables. And I thought, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get something like that. And I thought, I have nothing left to lose. So I called Aaron Fleming, and I had served my purpose in getting Animal Crackers out, but there was sort of no reason for them to stay in touch with me. And I thought, I got nothing to lose. And I said, is there anything at all that you think maybe I kind of could sort of help maybe sometime? And she said, well, actually, it's funny you called now because I had been Groucho's secretary, but now I'm his manager. And we need someone to handle all of the fan mail that's been pouring in lately because there's so much interest in Groucho these days. And we need someone who really knows their Marx Brothers to organize all of Groucho's memorabilia, which is going to be donated to the Smithsonian. And I'm thinking, please, 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 please. Oh,
Exactly, yep.
And in my mind's eye, like a Tex Avery cartoon, I pictured myself zooming over to Groucho's doorstep and knocking on the door while Aaron was still on the phone talking to me about what the job would entail. It was like, how can I get there as quickly as possible? And I initially thought that I would be working in an office building on Wilshire Boulevard where his company was, and he'd come in now and again to sign checks or something. She said, oh, no, dear, there's a room there that you can use for your office, and you can make your own hours. And I thought, they're going to pay me money to do this? And I initially worked 7 days a week because I couldn't get enough of it. The first week I worked 6 days and decided to rest on Sunday because if it was good enough for God, I might as well rest. And then I was sitting at my parents' house in Tarzana thinking, why do I want to be here? I can be in Groucho Marx's house, ankle deep in his scripts and letters and photos and posters, and getting to know this man that I never thought I'd even be able to shake his hand, much less talk to him, much less work in his house. And it was just really that, I mean, the first day was, it really, in my book, Raised Eyebrows, I draw the analogy, which is good because I can't draw anything else.
Me neither.
The analogy with Dorothy opening the door into Munchkin Land, and it all turns to Technicolor. And that's what it was like for me. And working inside his house, getting to know Groucho and his circle of friends who I knew well from the Groucho letters, so and also from looking at the credits as their movies would roll by. Mm-hmm. So I knew who they all were. Unlike, I don't know if you've had the experience of meeting someone when you're young and then years later after they're gone, you go, oh, I wish I could have appreciated that. I would have asked them about that. In this case, it was at the height of my obsession with the Marx Brothers. So, being introduced to Nat Perrin, I would think, okay, he worked on Monkey Business and Duck Soup. He created the Addams Family. Groucho's nickname for him is the Deacon in the Groucho letters. He's been friends with Groucho since the early 30s. And it was like my brain was like a Rolodex would flip to the card. Oh, okay, that's Irving Brecker. He wrote At the Circus and Go West. So it was just that. Plus, I got to meet the 2 Marx Brothers who were still alive. Harpo and Chico had died in the early 60s, so I never got to see them or meet them. But Zeppo, the straight man from their early films, and Gummo, the straight man from vaudeville until he was drafted into World War One, were still around, and I got generous samples of what it must have been like when they were all alive and in their prime, when the other brothers would come up for dinner, and I just kind of sit. I was always welcome at the table, which meant a lot to me, because I figured, you know, the cook would make me a sandwich and I'd eat it in the kitchen and talk to her, and that would be great. And it was like, no, if you're in the house, you get to sit at the dining room table. Mm-hmm. So it didn't matter if George Burns or Steve Allen or Nat Perrin were going to come to lunch. I was part of that conversation, or if it was, quote, just Groucho, or Groucho and a nurse, or Groucho and Aaron. And so I got to spend all this quality time with my hero, answering questions I'd had for years. And because of my fascination with history, I realized what a time capsule I had sitting next to me, eating his grapefruit and tomato juice. He was, of course, Groucho Marx, the man in the grease paint mustache that swirled around Margaret Dumont and Thelma Todd and all that. He was someone who personally knew people that I thought of as just in two dimensions in black and white, like George Gershwin and James Thurber and W.C. Fields. They were friends of his, which is weird. And then, of course, he was a man from 1890, a 19th century man whose memories went from before the Wright brothers to after the moon landing. And you know, who had firsthand memories of World War I and the Depression and the turn of the century and horse-drawn carriages. I asked him once, how far back do you remember? And he thought, and he said, I guess the Spanish-American War, which was 1898. So wow. It was just a remarkable experience for me. That's the short answer to your question about Animal Cracker.
Wow. I don't want the long version then, because we'll not get to anything else.
No, my shoe size is no.
We talk a lot about the fact on this show that when you meet somebody that you really admired for a very long time, they might not be the person that you thought they were, but sometimes it takes them a while because you know so much about them and they don't know anything about you to be kind of on the same level. How long did it take you to be on that same level with Groucho?
That's a toughie. I was so nervous. I certainly never took it for granted. There was never it ended up turning into 3 years. I kept thinking with every little health setback that he had, that bang, the coach was going to turn back into a pumpkin, and I could say, well, it was a heck of a ride, you know. And I ended up being there for the last 3 years of his life. But I never took any of it for granted, even though some of it was difficult because I'm watching my hero fade out, and then Erin Fleming and her volatile personality. But eventually, you know, it meant a lot to me that Groucho got me, that I wasn't just some hippie kid that just smokes pot and listens to rock and roll and doesn't know any of the people that he cares about. It meant a lot that we had similar tastes and that I was interested in that stuff. I mean, one time he called me into his room and he gave me a $20 bill and he said, go down to the record store and get me some records. You know what I like. And I thought, ooh, he knows that I know what he likes. He doesn't have to spell it out. And I know one time early on, I was visiting my sister in Portland, so I wasn't there. And the cook told me that he was walking down the hall and looked in my office and wondered where I was. So she told him that I was visiting my sister. And he said, he's a nice man and he really knows what he's doing. She conveyed that to me. Aww. So, you know, he wasn't very effusive with compliments, given the fact that his name was, in fact, Groucho and not Warmo or Cordialo. But there did develop, I won't go so far as to say we were friends, because I think that's presumptuous, but it was better than employer-employee.
Okay.
It was more like if he were an uncle that was fond of a nephew, something like that. But yeah, I've had very good luck meeting heroes and not being disappointed. Here's a Zeppo slight detour.
Okay.
I did see Groucho once before before the Animal Crackers campaign, when he was doing his one-man show in Los Angeles. My friend and I spent $9.50 on a ticket, which was a fortune that would not give you parking in their lot now.
Right.
And we sat near the back, but it didn't matter because we got to see him in person, and I thought that's the closest we'll get. Afterwards, he and I were in the parking garage, and I spotted Zeppo Marx. I knew what he looked like again because I was such a fanatic. I had kept up with any book, magazine, newspaper articles, and I thought, well, I'm never going to meet Groucho, but I know I'm going to be able to, at least I can meet a Marx brother. So he was with some young blonde, and he looked frustrated that he couldn't find his car. I went over and I said, Mr. Marx, excuse me, I just wanted to let you know how much I enjoyed you in your films. And he said, you weren't enjoying me, you were enjoying my brothers. And I thought, well, I'm so glad I took a moment to deliver this comment.
Right.
So that was a little disappointing. I had similar experiences trying to compliment Dana Andrews for Best Years of Our Lives, and he said it was all William Wyler. And I saw Sylvia Sidney and tried to compliment her for Sabotage, and she said, oh, that was all Alfred Hitchcock. But, you know, the Zeppo thing was the only thing that was like a reprimand. And I had the last laugh because I got to know him when I got to work for his brother. And he was quite a pistol. You hear a lot about him, and people are skeptical about his charisma and sense of humor because he didn't have a chance to utilize it in their films. He was never comfortable being on camera. And he left after Duck Soup in 1933 and became a very successful agent, handling such obscure bit players as Clark Gable, Carol Lombard, Barbara Stanwyck, Lucille Ball. He did really well at that. But he really did light up a room when he walked in. He was in his mid-70s and looked like he was in his early mid-50s. Wow. And he took a liking to the date that I brought to Groucho's one.
Oh, yes. I have this question on our list of things to ask, but if you want to go there now, that's okay too.
Well, I was dating this attractive young lady, very bright, blonde hair, blue eyes, and quick-witted and well-read. And I had a date with her one night, and it was when Zeppo and Gummo were coming up from Palm Springs. And Aaron Fleming said, why don't you stay to dinner and then you can meet Zeppo and Gummo? And I said, I'd love to, but I have a date. And Aaron said, bring her. And I thought, ooh, I like that. Because my friend Linda was pretty unflappable. And as I said in the book, I was determined that she be flapped. So I picked her up. And she said, where are we going? And I said, oh, it's a little out of the way place. And as I started up Hillcrest Drive from Sunset Boulevard, she said, I know where we're going and I don't want to do this. And I said, well, we're going to do this. And what I didn't know, I guess, was that Zeppo picked up where Chico left off in terms of women. He loved women. He chased and frequently caught them. And as I recall, he was with an attractive, years younger blonde in the garage that night 2 years earlier. So he was sort of captivated by her. He said, you know, Steve, you and Linda ought to visit me in Palm Springs sometime. You should both come down. And I said, I don't know. I was in Palm Springs when I was like 9 and it was sweltering. And he said, well, when were you there? In the summer? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, you know, Steve, it's cold in Alaska during the winter, too. So, she and I eventually broke up, not all that long, within a year later. And I had a couple of photos that I wanted him to sign. So I sent them to him with a cover note saying, by the way, Linda and I broke up, so I know you've been around the track a few times if you have any advice for the lovelorn. And I get this call in my dorm at UCLA. Steve, it's Zeppo, Marx. I hope I'm not bothering. No. Listen, I got the photos you sent. I'll be happy to sign them. God, I was good looking back then. Anyway, listen, I don't want to step on your toes, but, and you have to let me know if this is at all awkward for you, but do you think Linda would go out with me? And I thought, this is really weird. I asked him for advice for the lovelorn, and he's hitting on her. I said, well, he said, because if this is at all, the last thing in the world I would want to, no, that's okay. I said, I know she got a kick out of meeting you, so let me ask her, and we'll get back to you. Okay, because if this is at all, no. So I called her up, and she got a kick out of it too. I thought it was kind of strange, but let's go through with this experience and see. So she was 19, I was 20, and he was 74. That's how that measured out.
Wow.
He took her out once. He took her to dinner in San Diego and then to Mexico to see a highlight match in Tijuana. I guess that was Zeppo's standard first date, was dinner in San Diego and a highlight game in Tijuana. And the next time I spoke to him, he said, I want you to know she was very nice. I never even kissed a goodnight, Steve. I want to tell you that. And she's very nice, but all she did was talk about herself. And then I saw her on campus, and she said, oh, I had a good time. He's very nice, but all he did was talk about himself. And I thought, this has a strange symmetry to it.
Right.
And after that, whenever I'd be at a party at Groucho's, and Zeppo would invariably find someone to introduce me to, just so he could say, this is Steve. He's a nice fella. He and I dated the same girl, but he got further with her than I did. That was like my full name. So, yeah, I've had really good luck meeting. I mean, I've met a number of Fred Astaire and Katharine Hepburn and Woody Allen and Dick Cavett and Steve Allen, and some of them through Groucho and others, beyond. But I haven't had that occasion of don't meet your heroes or you'll be sorely disappointed.
That's a good thing.
Okay.
Now, I wrote up quite a few questions that are just random a little bit, kind of to get some of my curiosities out of the way, and Tracy as well. So he's got the first one that we're going to hit you up with.
Okay.
So, when Groucho hosted You Bet Your Life, he sported a 100% real mustache. But earlier in his films, I read he used phony glue on facial hair. Why didn't he just use his own, since that was often painful to remove that?
Well, he didn't use glue and a fake mustache. It was grease paint, which wasn't painful to apply or remove. It was very rare in his early adulthood, as an adolescent and in vaudeville, that he wore a mustache. There are some photos that show a slight homegrown mustache, but he tended to be clean shaven. And it really just became part of his character to have a big, thick black mustache and black eyebrows and glasses and a cigar. And it was initially something that he glued on Broadway, and one night he was late getting to the theater and didn't have time to put the glue and let it dry and put the thing in it, and he just dabbed his finger in some black grease paint and smeared it across his upper lip, and got just as many laughs that night as any other night. So he just thought, why should I knock myself out with it?
Yeah.
And he also could have the best of both, traveling incognito as himself, because out of makeup, there's photos of him without the mustache and without the grease paint eyebrows and all that. And most people would have no idea who he was. So he could travel around without people pestering him for autographs and stories and all that. But then he also had a healthy ego. So in the early 40s, he was part of something on behalf of the Allies in World War II. That was a bond drive of celebrities that traveled by train around America to sell war bonds, raise money. And there were all sorts of James Cagney and Laurel and Hardy and Claudette Colbert and Bert Lahr. And I mean, it's just a big group of people that were willing to spend their time. And apparently they'd get off the train and people would cheer as each celebrity would make his or her appearance, and Groucho would get off and there'd be nothing, and he would go back into the train
to put on his mustache
and come out to raves. So he did need that, being a performer that thrives on adulation. But he really didn't grow his own mustache till the late 40s, after they had given up doing their films, and he was about to start You Bet Your Life, and that's the one he wore for the rest of his life.
100 years ago. It's hard to believe that this is the 100th anniversary of the Marx Brothers' first film. It was called Human Risk, and besides a small test audience, no one ever saw the film. Do you know if footage exists for that film? Have you heard anything about that?
The film was called Humor Risk, which was a pun on the word humoresque, Humoresque.
Okay.
And it was shot in New Jersey. They were all on the East Coast at the time. My understanding from what Groucho said and from people who were in a position to know back then was that there was one print. It was privately financed. It was not a studio thing. It was not like an official, they were signed to appear in this film. And also in 1920, they hadn't made it big. They hadn't done Broadway yet. They were popular in vaudeville, but they weren't stars really, and for another few years. So it was like a privately financed thing that there was one print made of, and according to Groucho, they showed it once in a theater, basically for friends and family and passers-by, and deemed it awful. And the print was misplaced, and I don't think that. Here's the thing about this.
Okay.
This is one of those legendary mythological things. Maybe there's still a print of it out there somewhere, and people say they've researched it and they have reason to believe it. And I think it's just wishful thinking. It's magical thinking, because we would love to see it. Therefore, it's got to be out there somewhere. And because it wasn't an official studio release, it was never distributed. They never struck a bunch of prints. Also, if even that one print in 1920 survived, it would have been on nitrate, which not only deteriorates and turns into sludge, is highly flammable and explosive. So the idea, people will say, oh, but maybe someone realized what it was. And I said, you don't understand. In 1920, having something with the Marx Brothers in it, it didn't register on most people's, seismograph. So it's wonderful to look back and think, I bet somewhere, they keep finding we thought these films were lost, and now we found this Chaplin film, and it's like you're still dealing with official releases from studios, whether it was Keystone and Senate or Griffith. And so it makes sense that there would be buried repositories where the coolness of the ground preserved them, or in some library or archive or something. It's just not feasible that Humor Risk exists. I'm also asked about horse feathers, because there's there's a section that's so chopped up. It's a scene where they're all going in and out of Thelma Todd's apartment, and Harpo's throwing a block of ice out the window, and they're coming in and leaving one at a time and racing around. And it's all broken up, and there aren't any good prints of that we know of. The film, it was made in 1932, which was before the Hays Code kicked in, and then it was reissued in 1936. And what studios often did was take their earlier films and snip out racy bits of dialogue or images or something. And apparently that sequence had some racy stuff, plus there was also just breakage of whatever print they used to make their second negative out of. So what we're seeing are prints from 1936 that had been altered, both intentionally and unintentionally. I still hold out hope that a more complete print of Horse Feathers could turn up somewhere that still has that stuff.
Right.
Because, I mean, that's what just happened with Animal Crackers. The Blu-ray that was issued with that box set of Paramount Marx Brothers films has Animal Crackers with a few minutes of stuff. There's the line in Hooray for Captain Spaulding where Groucho says, "I think I'll try and make her." And there's business that Harpo does. There's things that were just sort of racy that were cut out for the reissues. But in a British film archive, they found an original 1930 print. So people refer to the Blu-ray thing as that the footage was restored. It wasn't. It was just luck that they found a complete print. Wow. So I don't see why there couldn't be the same thing for Horse Feathers, and we can finally see. I mean, the movie's short as it is, like 68, 72 minutes, something like that. I think that could happen. I don't think humorous. I think it's a fool's errand, even though I fully understand what a treasure it would be if we could find it.
Former Tonight Show host Jack Parr turned over the show to Groucho for 2 weeks before they welcomed Johnny Carson. I'm wondering if Groucho wished he could have continued hosting such a show.
That's a good question. I don't know that I have a good answer. Well, the truth is I don't know, but here's conjecture. That was in 1962. That was the year You Bet Your Life ended its 14-year run, which was pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Groucho was looking for another show to host, and there was this short-lived Tell It to Groucho show that happened after that that didn't do well. And he went to England a couple years after that, and it was still sort of a variation on You Bet Your Life, where ordinary people talk to him and they have a chance to win some money. I think he would have loved to be the host of The Tonight Show, although at the time it was out of New York and he had been living in Hollywood since 1931. So it would have meant relocating to New York, which I don't think he would have thought much of. But the idea of having a top-rated network show, I think he would have loved to do that. And it wasn't just Groucho. There was a series of interim hosts between Parr and Carson. Parr didn't really choose Groucho. Parr left the show, and it was up to the producers of Tonight and the people that oversaw the late night lineup at NBC that made the decision. But there was a series of people, but for 2 weeks it was Groucho, and it was the last 2 weeks, so he did get to introduce Johnny Carson. And I think there's some audio of it that exists, but no footage, and a couple of photographs of him with Carson from 1962. Again, it would be wonderful if that resurfaced, and maybe, but for the most part, NBC trashed their early films because it just took up space, and who cares, and why would anyone ever want to see this? It's easy for us in 2020 retrospect, or 2021.
Yeah.
I have to update that to 2021 hindsight as we become more blind as the years go by.
Just think, we might have never had Johnny Carson if Groucho kept the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, he had done some game shows, and he probably would have found an outlet somewhere. But Carson's Tonight Show was such a high point in late night, and we took it for granted, and then he was gone.
Now, you were Groucho's assistant when he went on his last television appearance, which was a show called Music Scene. You had already witnessed a lot of decline from Groucho. Do you think that that was a good idea for him to have been on that show and continue to do appearances?
Music Scene was a few years before, a couple years before I was there.
Oh,
and
okay.
Not his last appearance. He continued to make a few appearances. The Mike Douglas Show. I think the Mike Douglas Show, they were doing a salute to Ernie Kovacs, and Groucho was on, and Edie Adams, who was Ernie Kovac's widow, was on, and a couple of other people. But I would say in general, I was against him continuing to appear because people were saddened that he had gotten old and frail, and they wanted to remember him in his prime. Yeah. It's a little unfair that we expect our heroes to be immortal. And in fact, if he had never done his one-man show and the Animal Crackers thing, I would never have had my dream come true or that dream job. So speaking selfishly, it worked out great for me. But again, this was largely due to Erin Fleming's own ambition. She wanted to be a producer, and she was in control of Groucho's life. And I don't think she saw clearly the condition that he was in. I think she really had trouble accepting his mortality, and I don't think she realized that it had a negative impact on a lot of people. The flip side of that is Groucho loved performing. So it fed that gratitude of having audiences stand on their feet cheering him. Mm-hmm. I mean, that, you can't underestimate that. But in terms of the wisdom of continuing to appear in public, even though he could be very funny at the lunch table or in his living room or just conversing with the people in the house, that's different from having a spotlight on you and nationwide audience and all that. Absolutely. So no, I would kind of rather he hadn't, but he enjoyed it, and it's the color of truth is gray, as they say. It's not always a good, bad, hero, villain thing. Same thing with Erin Fleming.
Just months before Groucho passed away, his brother Gummo died. Did Groucho attend the funeral, and how was he after? Was he like in the months after that?
We didn't tell him.
Oh, really?
Wait, really?
He didn't know.
Wow.
Groucho, by that time, was in very creaky shape. And Gummo died not that long before Groucho did.
Right.
And, there's a letter that Groucho wrote to his friend Nunnally Johnson, who was one of the great screenwriters of the 30s and 40s and 50s. And I think it was after Chico died, and it said something like, if you and Thurber and Goddard Lieberson and a few others kick off, I might as well just throw in the towel. And Nunnally died the same year Groucho did, and it was kept from him. And his friend at CBS, Goddard Lieberson, it was the head of CBS Records, died. He was actually supposed to be the executor of Groucho's estate, but he died before Groucho did. And then Gummo's death. It was sort of a blessing in a very convincing disguise that Groucho was sort of out of it at the very end, because it made it practical to keep such tragic news from him, because we were sure he would totally give up the will to live. He was very close to Gummo, always had been. There weren't any brothers that were estranged from each other, and they all seemed to love Harpo. He apparently was as angelic as the instrument he played. Yeah. But Groucho was very close to Gummo, and it really, if he had gotten wind that Gummo and Goddard Lieberson and Nunnally Johnson had all recently died, it just would have been machine gunning his weak heart. So he did not know that Gummo had died.
Okay, then.
Well, he certainly found out when he passed through the pearly gates.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, now we're getting into a
different.
Let's get into a metaphysical on
Right.
heaven and hell. I only want hell to exist for certain people who I won't mention, since you don't want to get into politics on this show.
We're okay. Let's keep it on Groucho, and then I've got some questions I want to move in about your career. Groucho suffered from.
Long.
It won't take long. Oh man.
Oh man.
Groucho suffered from some insomnia, and it's rumored that he would call some friends in the middle of the night because he couldn't sleep, and he would just say random weird things and hang up on them. Are you aware of that, or were you a witness to that at all?
I know that he had insomnia, although I think for the most part during the period I was there, he didn't have trouble sleeping. I only was sleeping at the house towards the end on weekends. I had been put in charge of the household by Nat Perrin. So I really didn't get to see Groucho in the middle of the night except towards the end. I hadn't heard about him making random phone calls, but it's possible that he did that at some period before I was there. Not sure.
Erin has famously been accused of elder abuse, and she certainly didn't get along with Groucho's son Arthur. What kind of behavior do you remember from her?
Well, the phrase elder abuse didn't exist then, but elder abuse existed then. I did not see her physically harm Groucho. However, mentally and verbally and emotionally, yes. And if you know anything about psychology, you realize that the sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me is bullshit.
Absolutely.
that names can cause damage far deeper than just slapping someone.
For a long time.
Getting back to what I said earlier about Erin's inability to accept Groucho's mortality, I think she felt like if she screamed and kept after him, it would somehow knock the rust off his brain and he'd be 40 again or something like that. But she was a very volatile woman. She could be the sweetest, most generous person in the world, bending over backwards to help you. And then she could just be a bat out of hell, just a Cruella de Vil, screaming and throwing things and having shit fits and causing people to just tremble. She would cause Groucho's blood pressure to shoot up dangerously high, and the nurses were concerned about it. But the problem, I mean, it was such a thorny problem because Groucho as he had grown older and weaker, he grew more dependent on her decisions. And so we were concerned that if we somehow were able to remove Erin, that might kill him too. This sort of like take the syringe away from the heroin addict and let him go cold turkey. There's no gradual way for Erin to have suddenly not been there anymore. So it was, she did put the spotlight on him at a time in his life when his last wife had left him and he was in sort of semi-retirement and didn't have really much keeping him occupied. So she did, pick him up and dust him off, and he went out a living legend and, with a much higher celebrity profile than if he had just kind of faded out in the late 60s. But the flip side of that is, she may have extended his life, but she made the end a lot rockier than he deserved. So, yeah, she was, and then later she was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. So she was delusional. It worsened in the years after Groucho died. And also she took prescription and recreational pharmaceuticals, which enhanced her erratic behavior. So she was a handful, and I don't know how I managed to survive all the way to the end the way I did, because she would perceive enemies everywhere. She was paranoid, and people were hired and fired. She was just the off with their heads person. And in fact, one night the phone rang at my dorm. It was not Zeppo Marx. It was in the early morning hours. I was in a deep sleep, and Aaron said, "I understand you're in on a plot to get rid of me." And the interesting thing is, she was paranoid, but in this case, she was absolutely correct. I was, in fact, in late '74, in on a plot to get, not to murder her, although that would have had its appeal as well.
Be a different story.
There was a nurse named Connie who was young and attractive, but had a medical background and had Groucho's best interests at heart, not her own ambitions. So we thought if we could wean Groucho away from Aaron, he would have Connie there as an attractive woman to hang on to feed his ego, but also would be keeping a watch over his health and safety and welfare. And his close friends who had been alienated by Aaron, family and friends, it seems like such a cliche because it's often true that there's a once powerful man who gets taken in by an ambitious younger woman and alienates the friends and family as the curtain descends. That's, right. Sort of the tableau. And they were all in. It's like, they couldn't wait, and they were going to come visit Groucho for the first time in a long time and ease him into this thing. Somehow Aaron got wind of it. Someone slipped up somehow, and she caught on and was able to circumvent the mutiny, and she was in control stronger than ever after that. She fired Connie, of course. But man, it was such a chilling moment to be awakened by Aaron anyway. And then I have no idea how I talked my way out of that, how I somehow said, "Don't be silly, I owe you the job. And I know what you have, Groucho would probably not be around if you weren't here." That's right. Somehow she didn't chop off my head. But that was. And then, Arthur, I wasn't a big fan of Arthur's either. He had years of ups and downs with his dad long before Aaron came on the scene. They had estrangements that would rise and fall over the years. And I thought Arthur's wife, Lois, was just a shrew. I took an instant dislike to her. I thought she was sort of like a scaled down Aaron, not as powerful, but and Aaron also would tell me that if Arthur was in charge of Groucho, he would put him in a convalescent home, which Groucho hated. And I never knew, when Aaron told me something, if it was absolutely true, partly true, or completely fabricated. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't really rooting for Arthur to take the bull by the horns, because I didn't know what that would do to Groucho's quality of life. And then Arthur saw me as one of the Aaron people. I was from Aaron's camp. You're one of those people that she hired. So I was kind of in the middle, in between, especially as Aaron realized the degree to which I was able to separate my gratitude for the job from my allegiance to Groucho. And so during this big fight over conservatorship of Groucho towards the end, I was subpoenaed to give a deposition, which I was told would probably just take a couple hours. 3 days later.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, if you haven't caught on that with little prodding, I can talk for a while. I was the same way, even during the deposition, when you're just supposed to say yes, no, I can't recall. But and that's when Aaron really understood the degree to which I was not going to defend her behavior, but also that I was not eager to have Arthur win. So it was and all this when I'm like 20 years old. It was a lot to handle, but I was happy to take on whatever responsibilities I could because my allegiance was always to Groucho and not to Aaron or, myself, I suppose. Because people would say, why do you put up with that? I'd tell them about Aaron going on a screaming fit or something. And it's like, I don't want to miss any of this, however scary it gets. And I want to be there for him as best I can.
Nice.
I mean, and I was always like the first to be at a party and the last to leave because I didn't want to miss anything. And sometimes at Groucho's that was great, like the night that Jack Lemmon sat and played jazz at the piano when everyone else had left but my friend and me. Robert Benchley, who was maybe my favorite writer, the humorist of the Algonquin Roundtable, wrote a whole humorous piece about toddling. He said he always envies people at parties who can say, well, I guess I'll be toddling, and then they get up and leave the party. He can never guess that he'll be toddling. He said once he starts toddling, he's fine, and he can get out the door and go home. But he can never guess that he'll be toddling, and so he's always the last person at a party, and I think I suffered the same affliction.
Well, when Groucho passed away, it kind of left you dealing with the ongoing battle over his money and possessions and that kind of thing. But instead of going there, what brought you into your career? I mean, you were still a very young man at that point. What brought you into writing, and had you been doing that? Did Groucho help you? How did you determine your life path from there?
Towards the end of my Groucho stint, I was working part-time because there just wasn't as much for me to do. And since I had graduated college, and I did, by the way, at the halfway mark, I shifted my major from history to motion picture television because I just couldn't shake how attractive that whole world was to me. I was much more attracted to Groucho's circle of friends than Aaron's quirky circle of younger people. But I realized this is really what the world I want to work in. And I got a job working in the steno pool at Universal Studios from 11 to 8 each day, typing Rockford Files and Kojak and Columbo, and that was paying the rent, which was $150 a month, and I was terrified I would never be able to meet it. For half of a duplex in North Hollywood, $150 a month, and I thought, how am I ever going to accomplish this? So I worked in the steno pool at Universal. One of the things it showed me was you didn't have to be Ernest Hemingway to write something that sells, because some of the stuff that I typed up I thought was really mediocre. So that sort of led me to think maybe I could kind of sort of do this. Mm-hmm. Then I became a production secretary at Universal. And backing up slightly, when I was still working for Groucho, I stole Dick Cavett address out of his little black book. Cavett had written a book called Cavett in 1974.
Genius title.
Yes. What was it about? Actually, that reminds me that at UCLA when Groucho and I were plugging Animal Crackers, Groucho took a moment and said, I also want to let you know that there's a book out called Groucho and Me in paperback now. And I said, who wrote it? And he said, who wrote it? One of the Ritz brothers wrote it. So yes, Cavett wrote Cavett. And the Dust Jacket blurbs were from Groucho and Woody Allen. And Groucho shuffled into my room at the house and said, read this, you'll enjoy it. And I thought, well, I better read it because he's going to ask me what I thought of it. At the time, I admired Cavett, but I didn't make a point of watching him each night. And I thought of him as sort of the thinking man's Carson, even though Carson was bright. And in the book, Cavett writes about meeting Groucho and jotting down on slips of paper key words that would remind him of stories Groucho told him, and that he was not sure what some of them meant anymore. And he mentioned a couple in his book, and I thought that I knew what they meant because of my association with Groucho. So I stole his address and wrote him a letter and explained who I was. And he wrote me a letter back that said, "You were uncannily on the nose with your 2 guesses. I'm about to go out of town, but write again and I'll answer again and better." And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of a beautiful friendship that continues to this day. And I would send him letters about what was going, the intrigue behind Aaron and Arthur and all that stuff. And then when Groucho died, I thought, well, I guess that's it for my connection to Cavett, because why would he want to stay in touch with me if I wasn't a pipeline into the Marx intrigue? And the week Groucho died, Dick called me from New York and said, "Listen, I hope just because Groucho's gone, we're not going to lose touch. And by the way, I hope you don't mind, but I've shown some of your letters to Woody, and he says they're very well written." So I emptied the urine out of my shoes and thought, wow, this transcends anything. And Cavett and I kept up our correspondence. When I did read that book, I related so much to him from the first page. It's like we were both born in the Midwest. We both lost our mothers to cancer at an early age. We were both obsessed with the classic comedians of the 30s. We were both shy around girls. And I thought, I bet if I ever met this guy, we'd hit it off. But what are the chances? Because he's this Yale Manhattan snob, and I'm just this kid in LA. But I did meet him, and in fact, he's the one that hired me away from being a secretary at Universal, because I would send him little short Benchley-esque things I would write, and he knew that I wanted to write, and he was going to have a show at HBO called HBO Magazine, which was just essentially a sort of humorous, interesting look at things coming up that month on HBO, interviews with people and little commentary and stuff. And he hired me to write it, and I made the quantum leap from LAX to JFK. I took off and the landing gear retracted. I was a secretary, and when it touched down, I was this writer from California, as far as HBO knew.
Sure.
And that was, I lived in New York for 2.5 years, and it was just a fabulous experience, seeing it through Cavett's eyes and being able to just walk around and see all these. I felt so at home with the Algonquin and all of the architecture and art galleries and museums and all this stuff. And I got to meet Katharine Hepburn, and through Cavett got to meet Woody Allen. And unfortunately, work dried up there just as I was offered a lucrative job in LA writing for a show produced by the guy whose secretary I had been. And I wished that I didn't have to take it, because I didn't want to move back to LA, because I loved New York. And right before that offer came through, I was being strongly considered to join the staff of Late Night with David Letterman, which was in its early years. And I had a meeting with Barry Sand, the exec producer, and Letterman, and we got along well. And they ended up, it was frustrating, they ended up, instead of hiring someone, they expanded the responsibilities of someone who was already on their staff.
Oh.
And they said, if we had, it would have been you. And it wouldn't have been a lot of money, but it would have been enough that I could have turned down the LA job. But then it was like the writing was on the wall, so I rolled back to Los Angeles, and I've been here ever since. However, I, have sort of made a go of it, writing for episodes of Murder, She Wrote, and Simon and Sliders, and the new WKRP in Cincinnati. And I've done voiceover work for radio and for cartoons, animation. Cartoons and animation, that's how versatile I am. and of course wrote Raised Eyebrows, my years inside Groucho's house, which is available in paperback and is available in Kindle and audiobook with, big surprise, me doing all of the voices and reading. And if any of your listener viewers want a signed copy of my book, inscribed to them or someone else, they can order one from my website, which is Steve Stoliar, STOLIAR.com, and I'll be happy to inscribe it and send it on its way to you. And
that's not all.
But wait, there's more. If you call in the next 10 minutes, you'll get this adorable blanket that shows you care. Where? Oh, my book is being developed into a motion picture.
As it should
Really?
be. That's
What's left
cool.
in my mind. And again, as with my book, it's not a biography of Groucho. It's about his last years and this kid who would give anything to meet his hero, and then getting more than he bargained for in the wonderful and the scary department with this ambitious younger woman. And I co-wrote the screenplay and co-exec producer, and it's slowly coming together. It's been another long and winding road. Trying to get a movie off the ground is not for the squeamish, but it's on track. And I think once Mr. COVID is finished doing his thing, things will get back on track, as is the case with many TV shows and movies. But it'll be really weird seeing someone play me at 19 with my mutton chops and mustache and shaggy hair and all that. And of course, it doesn't really casting-wise, only like 17 people worldwide would be in a position to say, that's not what Steve looked and sounded like. And in fact, I got to spend time with Woody Allen when he was out here shooting Cafe Society a few years ago. And he was asking me about how the movie's coming along and casting and all this. And then he said, and nobody knows what you look like. You could get Orlando Bloom to play you. It won't be Orlando Bloom. He's too old anyway.
Well, before we let you go, I have one last question about something that's on your IMDb, which is kind of fun to look through just to cruise your pictures. But you got a picture of John Candy up there from a award show that I think you wrote for. Did you have an experience with John Candy? Because he was one of my childhood, people that I looked up to.
Yeah, I wrote the continuity, the introductions for two of HBO's Young Comedians shows in 82 and 83. And one of those, or 83 and 4, anyway, in the early 80s. And John Candy was the host of one. So I wrote his intro material for introducing the different comics, but also got to spend time with him, including getting to see Saturday Night Live when he hosted. I got to hang out down where the cast and crew were. Candy, pardon the pun, but Candy was a sweet guy. He really was. Very down to earth, very personable, self-effacing. I liked him a lot. I told him about an idea I had for SCTV. In John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, the bad guy is named Candy. He's like sadistic, and he's the villain in the thing.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I'm screwing this up. There is an old man named Candy, but he's not the bad guy. The bad guy's name is Curly.
Okay.
And so I told John Candy I have this fantasy where they do a sketch where it's Curly from the Three Stooges, played by Candy, in the middle of Mice and Men, where, Mo is saying, hey, stay away from Curly's wife. What's the matter with you? I told you to stay away from Curly's wife. And then Curly gets mad and goes, and starts spinning around. And Candy really liked the idea. I said, obviously, the problem with that is it presupposes a familiarity with John Steinbeck and the Three Stooges, which asks a lot of the audience, but he did think it was funny. And then when he was on the Universal lot to do Brewster's Millions.
Yeah.
We reconnected. He saw, what are you doing out here now? And he was really happy for me that I was back in LA and writing, and he had lost weight and was talking about the weight loss program he had used, and it was great to see him. But there wasn't a lot of interaction, but I just found him really charming, and he was always one of my favorites of the SCTV group.
And all very down to earth, right?
Yeah, no ego thing.
That's
and
cool.
I think he was one of those. Same thing with Peter Sellers, where when they weren't on, there wasn't a real distinct personality. They were much more when they were inhabiting a character. It was the same thing when he was hosting the Young Comedians show. He was sort of uncomfortable being John Candy. And in fact, he and his head writer, who had the most beautiful wife I'd ever seen. Oh, Tino Insana was the guy's name. Beautiful wife. They concocted this thing with Mr. Mambo just as a way to do a character bit, and so it isn't just John Candy standing on a stage saying, and now we have a talented young man from New Jersey who was headlined. So there wasn't any kind of ego there when he wasn't in a character, but the guy that was there was just very likable and a regular guy.
Very nice.
That's cool. That's very cool. Always liked John Candy.
Me too.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and taking all this, over an hour. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Okay. My pleasure. That's okay. Obviously, you just plug me in and press play and then put your headphones on and listen to the girl from Ipanema on music. All right. Well, this was very enjoyable, and I hope your viewers, listeners enjoy it.
I think they will. I did.
I
This
did.
was a great look into Groucho Marx.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And your life. It's your story.
Thank you, Steve.
This is your life. Okay.
That's a
Take
different
care,
show.
guys.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Our thanks to Steve Stoliar for being on the show this week.
That was a very cool interview.
It was.
I learned a lot more about Groucho Marx that I didn't know.
I can't wait for my brother to hear it, and he can tell me all the questions I forgot to ask. So...
Isn't that always the way it is?
Well, he didn't. He says, "Oh, I'm going to come up with all these questions," and then he just failed me. I had to do all the research by myself. But that's the way life goes sometimes.
Just tell him he's fired.
Oh, he's so fired. Not a chance. Anyway, we look forward to bringing you these video podcasts throughout the rest of this year. Hopefully, we can keep these going and expand our audience. So tell a friend. This is your job. Tell them your favorite new podcast just went to video, and you have to check it out, and then share it on social media. That is your job.
And you get to see our wonderful faces every week.
Every single Friday, we release a brand new episode here on Fancounters. So if you're audio only, go to the Fancounter YouTube channel and subscribe. All of our shows have already been posted on YouTube, but now this one, in total video, you get to see the guests, you get to see us. It's a great time.
You bet.
All right, don't forget, Instagram, at Fancounters Live, and make sure to give us a 5-star review on iTunes, or I guess they call it Apple Podcasts now.
If you do it twice, does that mean you get a 10-star review?
I don't think you can do it twice.
No?
No.
Okay.
All right. We are back next week with another celebrity guest, somebody that you are very interested in hearing. I know it was on your list of guests, and,
Oh, yeah.
and we'll be back with them. I'm not going to tell you who it is because we never do. It's a surprise. Come back. We'll see you next Friday.
Have a good one.
Bye.